Hello everybody, this is Catholic Dad, episode number 273, Mason Rudolph knockout. I don't know if everybody was watching football this past weekend, but the Pittsburgh Steelers were playing the Baltimore Ravens, and Mason Rudolph, the quarterback of the Pittsburgh Steelers, had a potentially career-ending head injury. And it was really a very subtle play. It wasn't much to it, but he was completely knocked out. And you know he was knocked out because when he got hit, his arms, they went into extension and internal rotation, and his whole body just extended, and he went down like literally like a limp biscuit. And he had no motor control or anything when he got hit by the other player. So he went from a standing football height in an extended knockout posture and hit the ground, which is a serious head injury. This isn't even mild head injury, and really it didn't look like that spectacular of a tackle or a play at all. Anyway, if you know anything about Catholic Dad, I've been arguing against helmets in sports for a really long time, and perhaps helmets on bicycles as well, until we get further evidence that they actually help head injuries and don't hurt head injury or make head injuries worse. And I've made the argument before that whenever you have a helmet on, your head is bigger and heavier, and by simple physics alone, you are more likely to strike your head. And also because it's heavier, it's also more likely to have more momentum to the head itself, and because there's more area around your head, you have less area to decelerate the brain in, and therefore the head injuries are only going to be more severe. And I think the Mason Rudolph injury was actually a good example of why helmets perhaps make the injury worse than make it better. And so what happened was Mason Rudolph was running away from another player, and another player came into him as he's throwing the ball. And the top of the player's helmet, you can actually YouTube the video, the top of the player's helmet actually hit the bottom of his face mask. And so when he hit his face mask, he got hit at an angle, and it gave him that angular momentum, like this. Like that, a little angular momentum, and the brain twisted, and that was enough shear force to actually knock the player out. Let it also be said that I've worked level 1 trauma for many years of my life, and I'm level 2 trauma here in my job as a radiologist. So I see a lot of head injuries, and I think about this stuff a lot. Well, anyway, so the bottom line is the top of the player's helmet hit the bottom of the face mask, and the guy's head turned sideways, kind of like a knockout punch in boxing, and he completely got knocked out. Now, if you use some of imagination when you watch the video, if you took the helmet off the tackler and you took the helmet off the quarterback, the tackler's head would have never even made contact with his jaw or face mask, and therefore the head injury would have never actually occurred. So this is a perfect example of testing my hypothesis that, number one, because when you make helmets bigger and heavier, it leads to more likely that you're going to strike the head, and it's also going to lead to higher shear forces and angular momentum to the brain itself, therefore lead to higher concussion risk. So anyway, you know, if you really wanted to decrease head injuries in contact sports, the whole goal, the main objective would be this, is to hit your head less, not more, and therefore you would actually make the head smaller. And I understand the forces, you know, helmets actually help you when you get impact injuries, like a hammer to the head, a baseball to the head, something like that, or like a falling 2x4, something that doesn't have to do with deceleration or acceleration injuries, just an impact injury, perhaps bumping your head on a crossbeam when you're walking or something like that. The helmets help tremendously with that, and it's been proven. But when you have a moving body going quite fast and suddenly it stops quickly, helmets don't do anything to protect the shear forces and the angular momentum within the brain. And therefore, if you wanted to make head injuries far less likely in contact sports, what you would do is make the head smaller and less likely to get hit. And those old football helmets, by the way, those leather ones that essentially used to go like this, they were just like hats for the most part. They didn't have a big face mask. They didn't cover the eyeballs. They didn't cover the nose. They were actually safer in terms of head injuries than the new modern football helmets. The other thing is this. When you make somebody feel safer by wrapping them up in football helmets and pads and whatever else, you actually make them more likely to engage in risky behavior. Now, this is also coming from somebody that played rugby. And so in rugby, you would never tackle anybody like they do in the American Football League, because if you went at somebody head on, where you're going to go face to face, you would get a closed fist to the face coming after somebody like that. You'd get a stiff arm, and somebody would just whack you right in the face. And therefore, when you were tackling in rugby, what you would do is try to get down lower toward the waist, and you wouldn't try to like spear them with your helmet or your head, because you would get hurt just as badly as the guy you were tackling. Now in American football, you have face masks and everything else. You can't get eye gouged, you can't get punched in the face, you can't, and therefore you're likely to use your head as a weapon far more likely than you would if you removed the helmet. And there are some studies out there that if you want football players to tackle with less concussion risks, what you do is remove the pads of the football player, and they'll start tackling in better ways that are safer for both them and the tackler. There's also, I read a guy one time. He said if you wanted to end every fatal accident, if you want to stop every car accident in the history of mankind, you wouldn't give them airbags and seatbelts, but what you would do is put 6-inch knives sticking out of the steering wheel, blades. So therefore, nobody would ever engage in risky driving ever again, because if you like even hit the brakes slightly, you'd be dead. Everybody would be white knuckle driving about 10 miles an hour. Nobody would go faster than that, and you would end all accidents. Now that's an exaggeration in terms of what we should do, but it does prove a point that when people feel like they could get hurt, they practice more cautious behavior. But when you feel like you can't get hurt, in football pads for one, you practice more risky behavior, and you run harder and you impact harder into each other. That's why football is a very high-end impact sport, and rugby is, well, they certainly do have some strong hits in rugby, but it's not run full steam ahead. It's more of a wrestling match to the ground, and therefore it's safer for people. And rugby players don't wear pads or helmets or anything else. It's really a full contact game without the pads. Now, when I was a little kid, we used to play tackle football all the time, and we played it more like rugby. We would never bowl over each other. We would kind of wrestle each other to the ground. But I remember one of my friends for Christmas one year, he got full football equipment, and he came out and tried to play with us, and we were unwilling to play with him because he had on all these pads, and he literally changed his tackling style just by having the pads on. He didn't care if we stiff-armed or he got an elbow to the face anymore because he had all these pads on. And I remember we actually took his pads and we threw them in the woods behind my house because everybody hated playing with them because of the dumb pads. Well, anyway, this is Catholic Dad making you think about it. Please like or subscribe, get the Mass and pray the Daily Rosary. And what is, by the way, a tackling football video have to do with Catholicism? It has to do with Catholicism because the natural world is all around you, and we, by observing the natural world, we can actually come to correct interpretations of like the direct orientation towards the natural world and God. So when I as Catholic Dad sit here as a physician and tell you that helmets are bad for your head, everybody would go, that's not what everybody thinks. You know, you're kind of wrong. Well, through basic physics, observation, watching the world around you, I can almost guarantee you within my lifetime, they're going to change the rules of sports where helmets become smaller, lighter, and perhaps non-existent to protect the brains of the players involved. And when I win this battle, by the way, you're all going to say, "Wow, Catholic Dad was onto something." Why? Because I observe the natural world, and I see things that a lot of people don't necessarily see. So think about it. You make your head bigger, you make your head heavier, and you give the greater chances of angular momentum and shear forces to the brain, you're obviously going to have more head injuries. And so this is Catholic Dad making you think about it. Get the Mass, everybody. Live a sacramental life.